Hi, welcome to this GCSE sociology lecture looking at how gender influences patterns of achievement in school. So when it comes to remembering gender and the impact it has on achievement, there are a few patterns to try and remember, and you can refer to these in essays or even short answer questions. So when girls start school, they can generally read and write better than boys. Okay. Girls also get better GCSE results than boys. More girls get good A-level results than boys. We've got more girls go on to university than boys, and when they go to uni, they tend to get a lot more firsts and 2-1s compared to boys or men at that point. And of all groups, white working class boys have the lowest achievement of all social groups. That's sort of like a point about gender, class, and ethnicity. They are one of the lowest achieving groups. So what I'd like you to have a quick think about is, why do you think this is? Okay, why do you think girls do better at boys at so many levels of education? Or why do you think boys are not being as successful? You could jot down some of your ideas. Okay, great. So some of the points that I'm going to be talking to you about today include these. So there are far more employment opportunities for females now than perhaps, say, 50, 60 years ago. There has been the impact of feminism as a social movement for over the past over 100 years, and the effect that has had on girls and their ambitions. But then there's also been an argument that schools themselves have become a lot more feminized. So there's this idea called the feminization of schools, making them slightly more hostile environments to boys. We're going to discuss the crisis of masculinity that is affecting men, predominantly working class men, arguably in the UK, and why that might be affecting how boys are doing in schools. And then finally, we're going to talk about the role of peer pressure and subcultures, with particular reference to the impact these have on male achievement. So if we're going to start off by looking at the different employment opportunities that are now available for females. More jobs nowadays are open to women that were traditionally male dominated. So can you think of any sectors that were traditionally seen as male, that perhaps we have got a lot more female practitioners or experts or workers in them? So the three that I've thought of is medicine, law and business. But of course there are many, many others. There's also women setting up their own businesses as well. That's worth referencing. So there are a lot more jobs, well-paid jobs that have got high status that are now open to women. It's normal to have women in these roles. And on top of that, we've also got equal opportunity laws in the workplace, which means it's completely illegal to underpay women. So in the same job, women should get the same pay as a man doing that job. And if that's not the case, that company is breaking the law. And what that has done is increased the wages for women. So I want you to have a think. Why do you think this has increased girls' achievement? These two things are having a lot more jobs, but also the jobs that are out there are a lot more high paid. Why might this mean that girls start to do better in school? So of course these things are happening in the workplace. So why on earth would they affect girls in school? So if you pause the lecture and have a go at writing down your ideas. Well, the main reasons that I linked to this explanation was, firstly, they actually want to get the grades now to enter these well-paid careers. So girls are going to start working harder because they want to be doctors, they want to be lawyers, they want to work in business, they want to be managers. They are working harder to get the grades in order to enter these high-paid careers. And secondly, because this has been happening for a few decades now, there are now loads more female role models for them to aspire to be like. Got a lot more female leaders in business, for example. So it no longer seems like such a mad idea that a girl can leave school and become a doctor, because there are plenty of female doctors. second reason I want to talk to you about is the impact of feminism. So feminism is a sociological theory, of course, that we've been studying, but it's also been quite a big social and political movement. Like most people's lives have been touched by feminism throughout the 20th and the 21st century, for example. So what has this actually done? So feminism has fought really hard to change the attitudes about the equality of women to men, to argue that they are equal, and to kind of give both the equal opportunities in society. Now, what this has led to is changes in norms. So remember, norms are rules and guidelines for behaviour. So it used to be normal for women to focus on marriage and children. So the behaviour that was normal for women is to, perhaps do a little bit of education, but their real priority was, building a family. But what is normal now? Okay, and this is asking you to make links to what you've learned from the family unit. Okay, if you've done it yet. What is now normal in a modern society for women to do if it's not just get married and have children? Well, hopefully you've written down some of the ideas I'm going to talk through with you now. So now the new normal is for women to stay maybe single for much longer, to prioritise their careers, and either choose to delay having children until they're more settled in their careers, or to not have children at all, okay? What sociological study have you studied? Many studies suggest this, that actually now women's ambitions and women's priorities have changed from marriage and children to now having a career. What was the name of that study? Well done if you got it. It's Sue Sharp. Now her research compared girls' attitudes and ambitions in the 1970s, and then she asked girls in the 90s exactly the same question, and they were actually way more interested in their careers instead of having a family. So the reason that this increases female achievement is that girls are now motivated to get good grades because it is normal for them to work. It's normal for women to now financially support themselves. If anything, it's a bit abnormal for a woman to say, oh, I'm going to marry and my husband's going to support my lifestyle. So women and girls are now aware that they have to earn money to support themselves, their homes, perhaps even their families as well. Feminism has also led to changes in school policies. So these school policies are, if you like, laws, rules that the government creates, okay? But that's also led to changes in school policies. One that we will have covered before is the introduction of the national curriculum. So this means that girls and boys now learn exactly the same subjects, okay, all the way through primary and key stage 3, like 7, 8, possibly 9. They all learn the same subjects before picking, if you like, their GCSEs and later their A-levels. The reason this has affected achievement is because previously, and this is like the national curriculum only came in the 80s, so prior to that, girls were very much encouraged towards sort of secretarial courses or care subjects, and weren't really given the same opportunity to do the more academic or the more practical subjects that many boys could do. The reason why this now affects their achievement is now because of the national curriculum, girls can access and achieve in far more academic subjects. They can access and achieve in technology, in computing, in science, which is traditionally seen as much more boy-type subjects, and they weren't really given the opportunity to even take part in it prior to the national curriculum. So that's pretty exciting for girls. There are also school policies known as GIST is one of the more popular ones, and there's another one called WISE, but I've just spoken about GIST here. So GIST is an example of a program that encourages girls into science and technology, hence girls, GIST, into science technology. What these sorts of programs do is they give girls advice when they're checking their options and what have you, telling them they should really think about taking these types of subjects. And now what we've got is an increase of girls taking science and technology subjects, whether that's GCSE or A-level, and achieving pretty well, because again, they no longer see them as traditionally male subjects anymore. But just a quick bit of evaluation at this point to be aware of. And you need to evaluate if you have to write any of your extended essays, for example, particularly the 15 markers if you're doing Eduqas. Despite these changes in laws, despite the improvement in employment opportunities, and despite the shift in norms to see that girls need to work in order to provide for themselves, girls are still taking a lot more female subjects, okay, that tend to lead to low-paid work. And this links to the idea of gendered subject choice. And we know that gendered subject choices are very much because, they're fearful of having the mick taken out of them for taking a masculine subject, or they just don't feel like they can be successful in, tech subjects because they're very male-dominated. And in terms of the subjects they end up taking, it's a lot more care-based subjects, a lot more creative subjects, a lot more literacy subjects and humanities subjects, which are all great and important subjects, but the way the economy is now, they generally don't lead to high-paid work compared to things like maths, science, engineering, for example. Another point of evaluation I'd like you to be aware of is about working class girls. So this idea that girls now want to go off and be doctors and lawyers and enter the workplace, working class girls don't really see these sort of high skilled jobs as a realistic goal. They still sort of feel like it's not for them. So working class girls are not prioritising necessarily careers and going off and being a manager, perhaps. So they are less likely to have those high-level career ambitions. So as a result, they're less likely to try as hard and maybe more likely to fail, okay? Not all working-class girls, plenty of them are very successful and hardworking, but just be aware that idea from Sue Sharp that, all girls want to, have really successful careers, that's not for all girls, because working-class girls don't always see that pathway as one that they can go along because of their class mainly. So now I'm going to talk to you a bit more about what's going on with boys and perhaps why they're not doing so well. And one key concept that we look at is what's known as the crisis of masculinity, which again, you might have covered in the family unit. So what we've got is there's been a real decline of traditionally masculine industries in the UK. Things like factories that make cars or steelwork or mining, for example. And these were industries that were all about physical labour. Okay, and there's quite a lot of status attached to these jobs. Like, they were working class jobs, but you had to be strong in order to do them. Okay, now as a result, there has been huge unemployment when all these industries shut down throughout the 1970s and 80s. That led to mass unemployment for working class men. Okay, now what impact do you think this has had on working class men to lose their jobs, to lose their status, if you like, from being physically strong to being a worker? What impact do you think that might have on working class men? If you can write down some of your ideas, that'd be great. And you can pause the lecture. So crisis of masculinity theorists argue that this has affected working class men in a couple of ways. Firstly, they lost their role in the family. They lost their breadwinner status. They lost their high status from being the main earner. And secondly, they've also lost their status in work. They're no longer seen as a valued employee because they're unemployed. So they've had a double whammy of status being taken away from them. And what this has led to is what's known as an identity crisis. They no longer feel like they have status. They no longer feel masculine through their family role or their work role. And this can be really dangerous because it can lead to a real strong sense of frustration. It can lead to anger. It can lead to depression. And just making a quick link into the family unit, it can lead to things like domestic violence in the home, because that's a way of, being physically strong and tough by being physically abusive. That is a way of them regaining masculinity, and linking it to the crime unit, which I know we haven't done this year yet. It can lead to criminality, okay, because they are frustrated and angry, so that can lead to crime. Well, sorry, domestic violence, of course, is a crime, but, fighting in the streets, trying to appear masculine in other ways, if you like. Not to mention, if they've lost their jobs, in terms of crime, they might turn to crime in order to provide for their families. But like I said, that little bit I've just said to you is crime stuff, not relevant necessarily to education. But anyway, back to education. So working class boys will then see this at home, okay? They will see their fathers, their uncles, older siblings, whatever it might be, They might see them lose their jobs, lose their status, no longer seem that masculine. And as a result, they then lack, if you like, working male role models. They don't see the male person in their household as a provider. And this can affect their achievement in school. So how do you think this might lead to working class boys underachieving in school? What ideas might you have? If you pause it now, and then I'll go through my ideas. Why do you think working class boys might underachieve because of a crisis of masculinity? So there are two main ways that crisis of masculinity theory explains working class underachievement. The first one is that they are just not motivated. They're not motivated to do well educationally, as there's just no jobs for them. So they just kind of give up. You would argue maybe they think, oh, I need to get a job as a lawyer or a job as a doctor. But for a working class boy, that might be a really unrealistic prospect. So they're like, there's no point. What am I doing? I'm just going to give up. No motivation. And that also links to the fact that they haven't got the working male role model at home. So they're like, what's the point? I don't need to work. His dad doesn't work. Why should I? But then the second is to do with this kind of idea of status again. So because they then turn to the peer group for status, because generally working class boys, they're denied it by schools, and they're also they're going to be denied it in work. They're not going to have, jobs they can be proud of when they leave. They're not going to go off and work in a factory and be physically strong or whatever. So they know that they're not really going in a direction that's going to gain them status. So instead they turn to their peer group for status, and they gain status through anti-school behaviour. Now, of course, this is then going to lower their levels of achievement, because anti-school behaviour will mean they're more likely to be sent out of class, they are more likely to come in conflict with teachers, so they're less likely to do as well. And this leads me to the last bit I want to talk to you about when it comes to gender and achievement, the role of sort of peer pressure and subcultures, in particular what's known as a Laddish subculture. Okay. So research has shown that boys value peer status more highly than teacher status, okay? Particularly working class boys. They are really, really concerned about how their peer group views them and gaining status, popularity, what have you, from their peers. So we've done this a few times, but what behaviours might gain them status in schools? And why might those different behaviours lower their achievement? So pause the lecture quickly here and just make a quick list of a few behaviours that might gain them status from their peer group in school. But why might those sort of behaviours lower their achievement? If you could just pause it here and then play when you've written your notes. Well, here's some examples. Breaking the rules, whether that's in class or around the school. Truancy, like skiving. And defiance, like rejecting the authority of teachers, senior management, or whatever. Now, why will these lower achievement? It's because it leads to time out of class, which means there's less learning, more exclusions, which means less learning. And then when it comes to exams, they haven't been there to learn the content, so they just don't do as well. And what's really important about these Laddish subcultures is that it is not seen as masculine to be a geek, okay? And boys that often worked hard, quite frequently were ridiculed by these Laddish subcultures. So it is tough, if you like, to be an academic boy, okay? It might be worth mentioning that this is much more common among working class groups than middle class groups. I'm just going to mention this to you if you're interested. Middle class boys quite often can gain status from being like top of the class, for doing really well, and they can be competitive with each other to do well in like top set, so they can gain their masculinity from that level of competition. But working class boys will not do that. They do not see trying hard as cool. There's no status for that, and often they will take the mick out of anyone who does try hard. So how is this similar to the findings of the Marxist theorist Paul Willis? So this is a little memory test, okay? So I would really like you to pause right now before I go through it with you, because the more often you try and remember the stuff I've taught you, the more entrenched that memory comes in your brain. So please pause the lecture now and think, well, how are these ideas similar to the findings of Marxist Paul Willis? What can you remember about his study? So pause it now and see what you can remember he found in his research of those 12 working class lads. Okay, so hopefully you got some of these details down. But Willis found that the working class lads valued their friendship and having a laugh, spelled like that, more than doing well. They didn't respect or listen to their teachers, okay? They did not see any point in school, and they mocked those that tried hard, calling them swats and ear rolls, was something else they called them. And the thing is, they never believed in the myth of meritocracy. The working class boys never believed they were going to do well, okay? So for them, the friendship group and having a laugh became far more important than any status they could gain from school or teachers. And it is worth mentioning, they failed school because of their behaviour. And this ultimately benefited capitalism, because capitalism needs people to fail because they need low-skilled workers. And those boys, as many working class boys that fail do, they accept their failure as their fault. They don't challenge the system. And that's why Paul Willis is a Marxist, because he would argue, actually, the whole system's kind of set up for them to never really be successful, which benefits capitalism. Okay. So the last point, sorry, I should have said that before, the last point I'm going to talk to you about is the feminization of schools. So there have been a few changes in education over the last 20 years that some argue have benefited girls and made schools more feminized, and they have left boys behind in terms of achievement. I spelled that wrong. It should be achievement with an E, extra E. Now I'm going to give you an example of things that have changed, and I'd like you to make notes of how these changes have affected the achievement of either girls or boys. So first one is there's been an introduction of more coursework. Now there's an argument that the coursework really benefits girls because they tend to be far more organised. Girls are far more likely to start working on things earlier. They're far more likely to have an organised system for coursework. Whereas boys are much more inclined towards risk-taking behaviour when it comes to their studies and leaving it to the last minute and maybe cramming and then doing an exam, okay? That is risky and that can lead to lower achievement as well. So yeah, more coursework really benefits girls. Boys, not so organised. Boys still leave it to the last minute. And the problem with leaving coursework, you just basically can't leave coursework to the last minute the way you can perhaps an exam. Though I definitely wouldn't recommend leaving it to the last minute for an exam. There are now more female head teachers. So schools themselves have got a lot more powerful female role models, okay, which is great for girls. But arguably, this is not so good for boys because they've got less male role models to aspire to. And we also have more female teachers in male-dominated subjects like maths and science, which is, again, really good for girls and goes to explaining why girls do better in these subjects sometimes. But boys are less likely to engage with female teachers. Not all boys, but many boys are less likely to engage with female teachers. They see they've got less of a relationship with them, okay? So they don't enjoy the lessons as much. So this can lower boys' engagement. So every single one of these might explain why boys are doing less well in education. But I do just want to go through a very quick evaluation point of this idea, and it's to go back that point about coursework. Coursework has been cut across most subjects. It was introduced and rolled out for about the best part of over 10, maybe 15 years. 10 years. However, from about 2012 onwards, they started to cut coursework because the government realised boys were not doing very well, okay? So coursework has been cut to benefit boys. And when you look at the data, most secondary head teachers are still male, okay? So yeah, we've got more female head teachers, but the majority is still male at secondary. So boys still have plenty of male role models to aspire to. So perhaps this feminisation argument isn't that strong. So just to finish off, I would like you to have a go at this practice 8-mark question. So the question is, explain why boys do not achieve as well as girls in education. And you'll be given this instruction in the exam. You should explore 2 reasons in your answer. So for an 8-mark question, it's almost a bit like 2 4-markers. You need 2 very clear, developed points that are well applied to the question. You do not need to evaluate. And the 2 points do not need to be connected to get together. So you can do one paragraph above and then a second paragraph. They do not need to be connected. Like I said, no evaluation, no conclusion. So what we've put together on the next slide is a writing frame for at least the first paragraph, and then the second paragraph I haven't given you so much help. I'd like you to have a go, perhaps on line paper, at responding to this question. So, this is a rough writing frame, paragraph 1, paragraph 2. So, you need to have a nice clear point. One reason that boys do not achieve as well is because the world of work has changed in recent years. For example, women are more likely to, so you tell me, write it in more detail, what has been happening in the world of work for women. Okay? This means that girls are more likely, and then this means girls are more likely to work hard and put more effort into their education in order to get a better career in the future. Whereas there has been a decline in traditionally male-dominated careers or industries, such as, so tell me what's going on with those traditional male industries, particularly for the working class. This means that boys, so what's happening to boys because of the decline in male jobs? And then you've got a nice application sentence at the bottom here, started off, and it's using the language of the question. It uses that word, achieve. Because of these changes, boys and girls achieve different in education. Boys are more likely to summarise what you've argued, okay? Second paragraph, I haven't given you much help. I've just said a second reason why boys do not achieve as well as girls is, so you need to think of a completely different point to make. It definitely can't be about employment or what's going on in work, really, because that's what you've written about in point 1. You need a completely separate point for paragraph 2. Like I said, no conclusion. If you want to do this in time conditions, I would give yourself maximum maybe 9 minutes to do this. It's roughly a minute, just a little bit more than a minute a mark for the exam paper. Okay, good luck and thank you so much for listening.